everyone. My name is Melody Jones-Poynton.
And I'm the Reverend Thomas de Vermouth.
And we are excited to walk the Sunrise Road together today.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a podcast with conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives.
Thank you for joining us. And here's this week's conversation.
Hello and welcome to our 5th episode of our podcast on the Sunrise Road. We are so excited to walk the Sunrise Road with you, the podcast where we weave hope in the fabric of our shared lives. And we're so excited to be with you. And together with me again is my co-host, Melody Jones-Poynton, and I'm Thomas de Vermouth. And
our guest today is our friend, the Reverend Dr. Robert Magoola. He's a little newer to Lincoln. He's been here maybe 2 years. Is that fair?
That's correct.
He was one of those brave souls who transitioned from one, in the church world, we call it a call. So he transitioned from one call to another call and ended up here in beautiful Lincoln, Nebraska. He's originally from Uganda and has degrees from Uganda Christian University, the University of Birmingham in England, Birmingham in England. That would be important to my family, Birmingham in England. He's also attended Dallas Theological Seminary and has a PhD in intercultural studies. He currently serves as the rector and pastor and priest at St. Mark's on the campus, the Episcopalian Church here in town. Good morning, Robert.
Hello, good to meet you. Good morning.
I'm so excited that you're here. And one of the ways that I knew that you were the right guest for this week in talking about hope is that when we shared this idea and asked if you'd come on, you said that you actually had done your PhD work in hope, and that it was that work that inspired you to name your daughter Hope, although it's not hope.
That's correct.
It is hope.
It is hope, but we call her in the Ugandan language, Lusoga, we call her Subi.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. So will you share a little bit with us maybe about some of your work on your dissertation and some of what draws you to, because your PhD is really in intercultural studies,
Correct.
which is that's kind of a big topic, but you focused in on hope.
So when I first wrote about hope, I was at Dallas Seminary working on my second master's degree, the Master of Theology, and Dr. Neil Burns asked us to pick a topic, and I chose hope, and I wrote about hope. I wrote it 4 times, that paper. I was never satisfied with it until the 4th time I thought, well, let me just put it in. But I kept writing. And at that time, we were expecting our daughter, Subi. And so we thought it's best to name her Hope, which is in Lusoga, Subi. It's one of many languages in Uganda. And then I kept on with that idea of hope because I was when I wrote about conflict at my PhD level, I was writing about how do we prevent conflict? And it really depends on the hopefulness that we are able to do this. When I wrote about hope, I was thinking hope is so important. It's probably more important than love. And yet in the great chapter on love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it says these 3 remain, hope, faith, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And so I was struggling with how could it be that love is the greatest and yet hope is the propeller. Without hope, you cannot love. And without hope, you cannot have faith. You trust, you're hopeful, and therefore you trust God. You're hopeful, and therefore you love somebody because you know that your love is going to do something in their lives. So hope is so important. And that's why I thought it's a very important thing. And I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak about it today.
I love that. I wrote that down. This is going to be the next t-shirt. Hope is the propeller of love.
Amen.
I feel
Amen.
that should be like a song, or like, I'm not going to sing, but
Yeah.
hope is
Which
the
also make a good
propeller.
logo, like with the propeller. Yeah.
Oh, that would be
Yeah.
good. That would be
Yeah.
good.
But yeah, I mean, I want to go in there a little bit, Robert, because I totally agree. But how do you go about when you are interacting with people who have lost hope? How can people um connect to that force again, or to experience some of that propeller, to get unstuck in that sense?
I think the first thing is for you who is going to them, or like if you go to them as a counselor or as a pastor, you need to know that they have hope because they're still alive. Everybody who is still alive has hope because they can still make decisions, they can still breathe, they can still move around, they can still do things, they can still be effective in society. And so it's hope even for those who feel hopeless. They just don't know it. And so I think the first thing is for us to know that they have hope and then remind them of it or help them to find it. And one of the ways to do that is to ask them questions that lead them to know that they have hope.
Mhm. I
We've
like
we've
that work of discovery. That's that what is already there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I interrupted you. Yeah, I love that hope is the discovery, discovering where the hope is. And I think as we've been talking about hope for all these many weeks, thinking about hope as cultivation or hope as uncovering, hope as revealing. Thomas, it was you who said in one of the episodes, was it with Marianne McKibben Dana, that you talked about theology being the art of rubbing the dirt off a penny and sort of discovering and unfinding. And that's kind of been a theme for us. But you also say that hope has something to do with agency and purpose and choice. And I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but I am wondering, because I do feel like there are a great many places here in the United States, here in Lincoln for sure, but also places around the world where there is no sense of agency, there is no sense of choice. And maybe for me as an American person of some amount of privilege, for me, choice is, this is my husband Steve's example. When we go to Subway to get our sandwiches, and there's so many kinds of cheese, and when he first came to America, he was like, I just want a sandwich. Can you put like bread and meat and cheese, and this is a sandwich? And that's not how it works here. It's like, my agency is, where do I want to go to school? And I can go to school anywhere, because that's been my experience of agency. But then I think about different places around the world and different people here, like I said, in town and around the country. That's not the kind of choice or agency or decision making that you're talking about. The choice of what kind of cheese or what school.
Right. Well, in a way, I too am privileged, having grown up in one of the better known families in Uganda. One of the, I was, comparatively, we were fairly well off as a family. And so I kind of come from that background. And my parents chose for me the very best schools they could find. And that was great. And they kind of put me on a route, on a journey that led me to be where I am today, and I've had many choices. But I realize you talked about your husband, and I understand it comes from the UK. And in the UK, you don't have so many choices, even though it's a privileged country. You don't get to choose. When I went to Birmingham, England, they told me, for this first term, you have to do these 3 courses. Actually, they are called subjects. And so you do 1, 2, 3, and that's what you do, all first years, first term. And the same thing happened in Uganda also. But when I came here and they told me, so are you going to do Greek or Hebrew or both? And in the first semester, and I was like, I don't know, just tell me, because I was used to where Peter comes from. So agency, we have many more choices in the US, and constantly you have to be thinking, what am I going to do? Do I go through A street or O street? It's like you choose, you make choices all the time. Same thing with England, but it's less. We didn't have as many choices in England. They made some decisions for you, and so the people who made decisions more. Like they had to make sure to decide for you in a way that was responsible. But at the same time, now that is compounded when you go to Africa, because in Africa we have the elders, and the elders make decisions for the family, and you don't have too many choices there. And the elder sibling, elder brother, elder sister will assert themselves on top of, like over the younger sibling, and they will make decisions almost as if they're parents. And so then later on, the younger sibling has to find a way of dealing with all that as they grow up. What am I going to do in response to all these decisions being made for me? Or where somebody tells me what I need to do, and yet now I'm becoming more and more responsible, that kind of thing. And so I think in terms of hierarchy, agency is, we have more agency in the US, and the next would be maybe England, and I think many parts of Europe, and then to Africa, where there's, you don't have so many choices. And yet I also know that in the US, we have people who are more privileged than others. And some people don't get to make as many decisions. If you're poor, you don't get to choose whether you're going to go to Subway or not. You know where the food pantry is, and you go there and find the food, whatever it is they give you. You take that and say, thank you very much. You take that home, and that's what you're going to have. While there are others who have money, and they'll say, well, no, I'm going to go to Subway, or I'm going to go to Chick-fil-A or something else. And so the choices, it's different places have different things, and different layers of society have different opportunities and choice. Mm-hmm.
So do you think that hope exists at every layer? Do you think
yes,
even for people who have very limited choices, say using all of the examples that we've been talking about, you're the youngest child, which by the way, my children would love knowing that the oldest child got to make all of the decisions for the youngest child. That would just go over so well.
One of your children might like that. Yeah.
Well, the oldest would love it and the youngest would not. That's how that would go. Yeah. But knowing, if you were a youngest child in a culture where the oldest was making decisions for you, and if you did not have the resources to choose, what food you were going to eat, or, what is your agency? What are your choices because I think what I'm trying to connect is when we started out by talking about hope and uncovering and discovering that hope, there's a belief that everybody has some agency, everybody has some choice, everybody has some purpose to discover in rubbing the dirt off of that penny, or, cultivating that seed. But how do you, when you're working with someone, or if you are someone who feels like you have no choices, and for whom that is the reality, you don't have choices,
right?
In the way that we think of them. What is the choice there? What is the hope there? What is the hope for the hopeless?
There is always a choice. The hope is that as long as you're alive, you still have a choice. Now, for instance, if you're downtrodden, or you are the younger brother or the younger sister, and you can choose to either agree or disagree with your older siblings. You can say to them, forget it, I'm no longer going to do this. And, usually that's what happens. The younger sibling will say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then they'll say, well, okay, then the older sibling has a choice also to say, okay, in that case, then I will no longer do such and such for you. Or I'll tell our parents that you have decided to say such and such a thing, and they'll so you have to face the consequences of your choices, each one. And so that's the way society goes. So again, when we talk about for instance, here in the US, where we have some people struggling and, they have like a choice between one pantry or another. St. Mark's on the campus, we have a good pantry here, but they can choose not to come here because maybe somebody said something to them that they didn't like. They'll go somewhere else and find food there because there are choices there still. There is hope for everybody who is alive because, and again, there are people who have been they've been in an accident and somebody is coming to them at the roadside and saying, let's take you to hospital. And they're like, no, leave me here. I don't want to go to that hospital or something like that. Or take me to another hospital. And they're in a dire situation. And yet they still have choices. And sometimes the doctor will come to them and say, okay, now I'm going to inject you with this morphine. And they're like, no, I don't like that. Just do it, just do the surgery or something, whatever it is they might say. We still have choices. As long as we are alive, we have hope.
That reminds me of the story Marianne McKibben-Dana tells in the story in her book about Desmond Tutu when he is part of a rally that's shut down by the government. And then he decides to have a worship service instead. And as people are gathered in Cape Town and the police is gathered in the church with the worshipers and just watching over every word they are going to say. And he preaches against the evils of apartheid and declares it could not endure. And then he addresses the police directly and says, you are powerful. You are very powerful, but you are not gods. And I serve a God who cannot be mocked. So since you've already lost, I invite you today to come and join the winning side.
Wow. Those are powerful words. It takes boldness to say such things in the situation in which they were, apartheid, and the police has the guns and they have the batons, they can beat them up and all that. He dared say that because he still had a choice. There was hope for him and for the people he was speaking for. And again, as I was saying, what did he have to lose? Anything else to lose? Nothing. If they lose their life, that's the last thing they lose. But they have made a statement. And that's his contribution to the story of South Africa. So whether he dies in that situation or not, here's his contribution. He loves his homeland. He loves his people. And he's like, I'm going to fight to the very end. Same thing with soldiers. Soldiers will go in enemy territory and they'll go fighting and so on. And they know they could lose their lives, but they still go because they love their country so much. They are willing to give the ultimate sacrifice. Still, they have hope. Even in death, they have hope. Only that they themselves will not see the result of what they did, but somebody else will. So they could say, I'm fighting for my kids or something like that,
I see.
So
Go ahead.
I was just saying, so those are two things now. Originally I said, as long as we're alive, we still have hope. There's hope even in the dying moment, because we know that there is something that we have sowed into that is going to outlive us. Something that, for instance, I was talking about a soldier, or maybe Desmond Tutu, saying, if they kill me now, yes, indeed, that bullet is going to come to me after I've made this statement. And once I've made it, it's going to reverberate. People are going to hear about it. And, it's going to give hope to these who are here. Maybe there'll be a few survivors who will go tell the story and they will encourage other people. And so the Spirit continues. There is hope. And I think that's the same hope that Jesus had, even if he was not going to rise from the dead, but he did. But even if he wasn't, he would have died for us, So hope even at the point of death, knowing that it is all well.
One of the things that we've said about hope is that sometimes it's kind of a duality of holding this vision for something greater than ourselves, for something, you talk about love of children, love of leaving a legacy. For Desmond Tutu, it was love of the people and uncovering for them that they did have a choice. They did not have to continue to live this way. As you said, it would come potentially at a cost. But there still is hope that you can say no. You can say no to this. But we've also been talking about when you can't find the long view, when you don't see, the end. One of the things we've said is holding out your flashlight and saying, what is the next right thing? So maybe that choice comes in. I am thinking about people in despair. And I preached several years ago now. Like, I don't remember all my sermons, but I preached one, and it happens over and over again in the Gospels where Jesus, there's a miracle and Jesus offers life or abundant life, and someone is given the choice of life, this life that Jesus is offering, or a continuation of the life that they're in. And so I preached this. I called it Choose Life. Catchy title, right? Not that original. But, when someone is in despair, uncovering for them, helping them uncover, because it's also, they have to discover themselves what that next right thing is. What's just the next step? Because maybe they can't see the long view.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any experience with that? You can disagree with that? Is there do you have any experience with that duality of the, justice is a long arc, but it has to happen in baby steps?
Right. And I think I'm hearing you from a pastoral perspective. The main thing I learned at the University of Birmingham, you believe it or not, was to listen, because pastoral studies is what I was doing in my first master's. Listening is the most important thing I can offer to the person I'm counseling. Mm-hmm. And so I basically ask them questions that will help them to speak to me about what they feel or how they, tell me more about their desperate situation. And when they do, then they begin themselves to figure out that they're not as desperate as they think they are, because sometimes we're desperate because we have no way of seeing it beyond our own circumstances. But when somebody else walks alongside you, they hold your hand or they ask you questions, there is a way that gives you hope. Just your presence is hopeful. Now, sometimes somebody will come in your presence and you're like, oh, I'm even more scared, depending on how they approach you. Like they said to me when I was doing CPE, clinical pastoral education, they said, remember, you are in the room. When you go in the room, you don't know that, you just know you're going to see this person, but the person knows that you are here. And so I come towering over this little old woman. It's like, is it going to hurt me or something? So I must come into that room with a smile and a good voice and encouragement, so I must remember that. So establish rapport and help them to hear that I'm here for them. And once I do, then they begin to open up. because sometimes they are so far away and they are behind many layers of protection. But, the more you are present with them, is the more they begin to understand that you are there for them. And so establishing that rapport helps to establish trust, and trust gives them hope. They're like, there's somebody here who is here for me. I can hope, I can expect, something good to come out of this. So whatever good it is, it might be just for them to know that somebody out there cares about them, and that's all. And that might open up a layer of protection for them. But sometimes it might be that you go a little beyond that and say, hey, tell me more about this. And they begin to open up. And when they do, then they begin to figure out, because you don't take away somebody's right to their own life and their own decision. They have to make the decision of what they want or what they need in life. But all that the pastor does is to say, what are your choices? So sometimes it's like 3 different choices, and my role would be to say, choice A, this is what would be the result of it. Choice B, these are the results. And choice C, these are the results. And it's still your choice. I might even advise a little bit, or I might be, kind of pushed towards a certain thing, but it's necessary for this person to make their own decision. So that's the main thing for me that I learned at Birmingham, was to listen, and then from listening, help the person to figure out the best way to be. And so there's always hope for those who are desperate. Despair is not an absolute.
Mm. And yet, I do not mean to contradict. There's that element, and you also hinted at that before with the apartheid situation, and there is maybe not despair, but desperation, that the sense that there's nothing to lose, that can make us very brave, or to give us our all into for a different future, a different for a vision of a different reality. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you could liken that to adrenaline, where you're like, well, there's a way in which you feel like, yes, there's nothing to lose, but there's always something that you still have, because Desmond Tutu at that time still had his life, and he had his calling, he had his collar on, and he was leading a service. And yes, indeed, their soldiers are here, and they have their batons and their big vehicles and dogs and whatever they might use to hurt these people. And yet they were still here. They were worshiping. They still had the faith. They still had God with them. And there's a lot of hope for them in spite of the desperate situation. So you could talk about a desperate situation, but somebody is not hopeless. I don't think people are hopeless. Even when you come to the end of life, you're like, there's a bit of hope. Maybe I'm still breathing. I still have maybe 2 more seconds, or something like that. We are dying. I might be dying, and yet I still have a little bit of time. In that moment, I could say something that will encourage somebody for the rest of their life. Or maybe I could sign my will in a different way from what it was before, and that would change certain things in some people's lives. There's hope still. Until we breathe our last. Yes, indeed, when we breathe our last, we are breathing it, with all the abilities of the body gone, and, we're not able to do so much with it. But hey, there's still hope. There's still hope until we come to the very end.
Yeah, a couple of things occur to me, and one is, and they're 2 very different things, but one is that you're talking about hope, but you're talking about our ability to deal with things that we cannot control around us. Like, I'm sure Desmond Tutu would have much preferred for apartheid to not have existed.
Mhm.
Like these sometimes situations, and I think they do happen on a national level, and with national politics. And I'm not thinking here necessarily just about the United States. I'm thinking about places that we love, that I love, that are near and dear to my heart, like places in Africa, where there are external forces, there are famines, there is corruption,
Mhm.
there are things that we cannot control, and yet I know firsthand from people who have experienced that hope is almost greater there. You can feel the hope
Yes.
of the people,
Mhm.
even in a situation where, say, they do not have much to share. They're worried about where their next meal will come from because there is a famine. It seems it's either famine or flood, like literally flood.
Yeah.
And so, hope does happen on that personal level. The other thing that I think of when I hear you talk is this thing that I have gotten pushback my entire career. Every time I say this, nearly every time I say this from the pulpit during the announcements or whatever, I get pushback. The sure and certain hope that we have in the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Amen.
And there is sort of a, and maybe they're
What's
not.
What's the pushback, Melody? What's the pushback?
Because hope is not sure and certain. But I say, in my experience, there is something beautiful that happens in what I would call the labor of death, of a physical death, where it's almost like the person who's dying embodies that hope and feels that hope more than anybody else in the room. So we might be crying. We might not, we might not know how we're going to live after this moment, what the next moments look like. But for the person who's actually dying, there seems to be a sure and certain hope that
because they believe in the Lord, the eternal
it
life.
doesn't
Yeah.
feel like an ending.
Mhm.
It's an ending for us, it seems. This is how I have experienced it time and time again, that there is that sure and certain hope. And maybe that's maybe people who are living in situations of great hunger, great poverty, great oppression, maybe they have to embody that hope even when they're not actively dying, but they're actively living, actively choosing to live.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when you're talking about the people who are dealing with famine, we've had some people dealing with famine in different places in Africa, especially like Somalia and sometimes Ethiopia, and also northern Uganda and South Sudan, in places like that. And I am from the southern part of Uganda, so some of the things that go on in the northern part of Uganda are not as close to me as it's the same country, but it's not the same experience all over. When you are going through desperate situations, I think of hope as a muscle. You keep flexing that hope muscle, it becomes stronger because you're exercising it. Now, when you're doing so well and there's nothing going, no problems, nothing, no issues at all, you lose the muscle. The hope and faith and muscle becomes a little lean. It's not as strong. But when you're in a desperate situation, you really have to exercise it. Otherwise, because the giving up of hope is dying. It's death. Now, you talked about, because earlier on when Thomas was asking the question about hope, a desperate situation, I was like, I thought it was in terms of just this life in which we are right now. But when you begin to talk about eternal life, now that's different, because again, we gain greater hope because of our faith. We have greater hope in the Lord at the time of death. It's like, yay, I'm coming to this, and I get to go to be with the Lord. because we've spent all this time worshiping the Lord and praying and praising God and spending time in the Word and hearing sermons and encouragements from other Christians and fellowship and all that. Then, so we tend to have something of God in us because we're made in the image of God. And when we go to the brink of death, the next thing is, hey, I'm done with this. I don't have to think about my tennis court, or I don't have to think about my car. I don't have to think about my house. I don't have to, now I got to be with the Lord. It's like where the Lord has been preparing a mansion for us. Now, of course, there are different interpretations of all these things, but there's hope for eternal life.
Yeah, maybe when you're experiencing famine, that promise of the feast. I mean, that's what I always think of, when usually comes out when I preach is, there's this great feast and everybody's going to be there and we're all going to be sitting at this great feast and it's going to be like the best food you've ever imagined. And,
Amen.
And we're going to be in the presence of Jesus. And so, who cares about
food? I wonder what that food would be like. Is it like pounded yam from Nigeria? Or it's going to be Subway? I don't know.
Well, I will say
choices in heaven.
I'm not sure it will be Subway, but I do hope.
I mean, the question is, are we going to have it our way or not? Right?
My belief is that it's going to be a feast of all people, and it is going to be the most delicious food. Like I really want, my this is really a tangent, but my grandma on my dad's side was a cook, and she had 7 kids, and they were poor. They were very poor, and she fed 7 kids from like nothing. But she was a cook at the country club, so she cooked for some of the richest people in our town, and so my family ate like the richest people in town off of whatever they could find, because she was, and I think that's what it's going to be like. I think it's going to be like, look at this food that was prepared and is a miracle of love. Like this is the best food you could ever eat. But that's a tangent, and I'm also hungry right now, so
Well, you need breakfast, maybe. And Robert, you encourage us to exercise our muscles of hope. I think that is a really good suggestion. And practically, how do you exercise your hope? How do you practice your muscles? For you,
well, I think it's experience. I really think it is. You just get thrown into the deep end, and you're like, "What am I going to do? I have to swim or sink." So that's how you exercise your muscle. When you get in the pool and you're like, "Ooh, what am I going to do?" You just have to go for it and swim and get up there. So you need experience of a desperate situation, and if you cannot have that, or if you don't have it like in your backyard, you get in the car in the morning and go to the office and go see the parishioners and all that. It's simple in many of for many of us here in Lincoln. But there will be, if you don't have the experience, I'm not asking you to go looking for trouble, but maybe hear people's stories. But even their muscles would be stronger than yours because they have been through it. And again, I'm not asking us to pray that God will give us trouble, but it's really by experience that we deal with hope, that we gain hope. And so I'm thinking maybe to walk alongside others who are desperate or going through desperate situations. And, we offer our encouragement, we offer our resources, and, just be responsible with that, because sometimes they'll take advantage of you. But you offer what you're able to responsibly offer and see where the Lord leads. And I think that gives hope. There are sometimes I've suffered with people that they are struggling, and because that's what compassion is, suffering with somebody else. Somebody is struggling with some situation, and I walk alongside them, and I'm almost as desperate as they are, and I'm praying and really hoping that something will go well for them. This next stage they're going to, I just want to encourage them and be with them. Now, I don't have to live as if I am the one going through that situation, because that is borrowing somebody's shoes and walking away in them. No, I want them to keep their shoes. It is their life, it's their situation. And whatever good comes out of it, it will be theirs. And whatever difficulties they have to deal with, it is their situation, but I want to walk alongside. So if you don't have enough trouble, just walk with somebody who is troubled.
I really got that what you just said about their muscle is stronger than yours.
Mm.
That is, I think that's such a key part of that relationship. Because if we don't recognize that, we get into really weird dynamics. And we feel like we can solve the problem for them and make the other small and wow. Yeah, that's I'm gonna put that on a t-shirt. No, I mean that's
you have 2 t-shirts now. Hey Thomas,
their muscle is stronger. Yeah.
If we take away somebody else's opportunity to deal with their situation, it's so disrespectful. It's like you've taken over their life. It's not right. So the best we can do is to walk alongside. Let them know we're here for them. But hey, just like, remember that eunuch who was reading a book and did not know, he was reading Isaiah. Philip just walked alongside him, and then the eunuch invited him to help him. He says, so do you know what you're reading? He was there alongside him. And the eunuch said, well, how can I understand what I'm reading unless somebody helps me? So let me help you now, because you're asking for it. And so that's how, we are close enough. We're in proximity, and yet we do not have to take over unless we're invited in.
I was Googling while you were talking. So I'm because I want to mention this book, and obviously I have a connection with the UK, but I read a couple of books a while ago. One is by Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks about people during the Blitz in London and the effects psychologically of those who lived closest to the bombing. And when the bombs were first falling during the Blitz in 1940, people were afraid and they didn't go out. But over time, as the bombing continued and was continuous, they learned to live and to go out, and they became bold. And it was almost like that experience of hope of like, it may happen and it may not, but I've been through this before. A loud noise, like all of this, and psychologically they became more bold because they were living in the midst of that. And then I was Googling this other book that I read, and I want to give a shout out to Gail Kewen, because Gail, I was thinking Gail will know this book. It's called The Splendid and the Vile. And it's about Churchill and how he held on to hope during the Blitz and what his life was like. It's by Eric Larson, talking about when that muscle of hope is exercised, and even as a country when it was exercised during that time period. And certainly it's not a universal. Certainly it's not a universal, but just that image of living through something like that together and exercising that hope muscle together. And I don't want to talk about the pandemic forever, but just the closest thing that I've experienced in my life is sort of, in those very early days, feeling like we were, like, and we sang all the time, we're all in this together, side by side, just that idea that we are walking along the Sunrise Road together, like we are, we're not alone, and you're not alone, and someone has been through something worse than this, than what I'm currently experiencing.
And you know what I'm thinking, Melody, is that if we have to go through some difficulty, to go through it without complaining necessarily, because we know one advantage of it is that we'll gain the muscle,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll be able to understand what other people have been through or what they go through, so we can walk alongside them more strongly, because we have a place in our experience that brings us to that.
Yeah, I would love to have a conversation with all of us, and put you in conversation with our friend Mary Pfeiffer, who we had on, and she talked about, post-traumatic stress, and that being caught physically in that loop of re-experiencing the trauma and feeling that helplessness and that hopelessness, and the importance of being side by side with somebody, and having somebody who can love you through that, love with you through that, be with you alongside. I don't know. Yeah.
The conversation continues.
Yeah, it will continue forever. So I don't want to end like on a downer like that, though. Maybe that's not
come
a
on,
downer.
it is hopeful. It's not death.
Oh.
Not dead yet.
Maybe this is a good way to sort of wrap things up, because I have always experienced you, my friend, as a person of joy. And a couple of weeks ago, Thomas and I went out to coffee with you, and we met your wife, your lovely wife, and she's so great. And we were having some coffee on a very snowy, icy day with our friend Peter.
Yes.
And you shared with us the origin of your name, Magoola.
Yes, indeed.
Would you share that are you comfortable sharing that with us?
So this is the map of the world, and I come from, where is Uganda? Somewhere around here, north of the equator, right here, like right around the equator, and East Africa. And the name Magoola is from the Basoga tribe, which is Luganda, Baganda. The country is named after the Baganda, and they are the largest of the tribes in the area, and we are neighboring to them. We're one of the two second largest tribes. And Magoola is from another clan from ours, but my great-grandfather used to go places and talk to, he would just go in the town square, village square, and find guys there. He would just talk to them, and they would be laughing. Then he would go to the next town square and to talk to them, and they'll be laughing. And so they call him Magoola, because he makes them laugh, one who endears. And so my dad did the same thing. He was full of jokes all the time. And recently, one of my daughters said to me, she called me Father Joke a lot. So that's the origin of my name. I love it. It's a good name.
The one who makes people laugh, the one who hears. I love that. You definitely are that for us. And this conversation has been, in all seriousness and challenge that we talked about, there's hope, there's love, there's joy, there's laughter. And there's laughter in the person who has gone through suffering. Their muscle is strong. And that hope propels us forward. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Father Robert.
God bless.
God bless you, and see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sunrise Road podcast. Our podcast is hosted by me, Thomas Timmermuth,
And me, Melody Jones Poynton, and it is edited by Vince Rule.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a ministry of Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Please like and subscribe and leave a review.